Bjorn Benson rocks a fly mullet. Louisa Kim is as open as she appears. And humans are ugly, giant bags of mostly water. Fact. Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Seventh Rule with Cirroc, Lofton, and Denise Crosby.
Hello.
My name is Ryan T. Husk. Today we're doing a review of Star Trek The Next Generation, Season 1, Episode 17, entitled Home Soil. Story by Carl Gers, Ralph Sanchez, and Robert Sabaroff. Teleplay by Robert Sabaroff and directed by Corey Allen. This was February 20th, 1988. We have a very special guest for everybody today. He's an evolutionary biologist. What a coincidence. Vice Provost for Academic Affairs at Duke University, and he's an occasional Star Trek science advisor. We'll find out if he advised on this particular episode. Special guest, Dr. Mohamed Noor. Hey, Mohamed.
Hello. Yay. Thank you for having me on the show. And no, I did not advise on this when I was 17.
Well, you should have, okay?
You know, what a coincidence. There was actually a little bit of biology in this episode. Your thoughts, Mohamed? Had you noticed?
Oh, I have a lot of thoughts.
You noticed that, huh?
I did. It's fantastic. Yay, science.
Well, explain it to me then.
Oh, we can start at the top.
47-point PowerPoint presentation.
Oh, yeah, I have that ready. Let me load that up. No, just kidding.
Yeah, Mohamed, I'm sure you were watching the episode, oh, this is great. And understanding what was happening. And I was just waiting for the story to move. I was like, all right, guys, come on, let's go. I already did this class, and I don't remember having this
class. By the way, everybody, very quickly, this entire season is sponsored by our good friend, Grandpa One, a.k.a. Tim Baum. Thank you, Tim. So sorry to interrupt, Cirroc. Please continue.
Yeah, so I'm curious to see how, you perceive the episode and what you take out of it as far as the science,
Sure.
Mohamed.
Sure. So I actually have so many thoughts. I'll start with some, but then feel free to just stop me because otherwise I'll just yammer on for the whole 45 minutes. So it's what I liked about this show is that it looked at forms of life that are not just humanoids with a weird prosthetic, which actually Ryan may remember actually at the Vegas convention last year, I made a comment about so much of Trek being humanoids with a funny prosthetic, and John Billingsley was in the back row and said, "There's nothing wrong with humanoids with a prosthetic."
Yeah, good old John. But he's quiet usually.
Yeah, he never speaks.
Doesn't have an opinion.
Yeah. Well, I loved that aspect to it, that it was something that was completely not humanoid. I loved that it was not carbon-based. So, Cirroc, when we were talking earlier, you mentioned something about how the word inorganic caught you. So the word organic, we tend to think of as meaning involving life, but actually in a chemical sense, organic only means carbon-based. Right. So if you have a lot of chemicals, a lot of compounds that don't have carbon as the main backbone, like carbon hydrogen bonds, then they are considered inorganic. So they could be metallic or they could be silicon based or something like that. Now for us, our proteins,
is chalk organic or charcoal? Aren't those carbon?
Yeah. I guess you would call charcoal organic, I guess, in a sense, right? Because it's basically, it's essentially most of what you see as charcoal is probably burned up dinosaurs or whatever.
Right.
So it kind of is.
Yeah.
But what was I saying about that? Sorry, I lost my train of thought of what I was saying right then.
You were telling me how organic equals carbon-based, basically.
Exactly. Yes. So carbohydrates, proteins, fats, all those things have this carbon backbone. It's like carbon hydrogen bonds through most of it. This was really cool because this was actually silicon based. And what was interesting about this, now this is a Trek aspect rather than a science aspect. I'll come back to the science in a second. This is not the first time we've seen a silicon based life form in Star Trek. In the original series, they had this big thing that looked like somebody spilled pizza on a shag carpet, but it's called the Horda.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you remember that. But yeah, that was also silicon based. That's why I thought it was very funny. They're like, that's not possible. Like, did y'all not read what happened on Kirk's Enterprise? Because Kirk already found this. But anyway, that was cool. Well, an aspect which I thought was really interesting was just trying to think of what might we see? And this is something that's a big part of science. What might we see if we go to some other world, right? We tend to assume that we're going to go someplace where we're going to see something that looks a lot like us, but we could see something that is so radically different from us that it's not even clear that it's alive. Now, what some scholars say is they say that we should actually be really careful about how we define life. And I think Beverly made this comment about life as things that I wrote down. What she said, they assimilate, respirate, reproduce, grow and develop, move, secrete, excrete. So this whole list of characteristics.
Yeah, and I had a lot of questions about that, but please continue, because that
Sure.
especially move.
Yeah, there's exceptions to almost all of them. So like reproduce, let's just use that as an example. Mules are not dead; they're alive. I mean, they're not, not
Good
being
point.
living forms, right? So I mean, there's examples to, or counterexamples to a lot of those specific things. Now, what some scholars argue is that we should actually come up with a better definition of life. I'm going to actually take a weird stance and say I don't think we can. I think we just need to go out there and just look and see what's out there before we actually decide how we're going to define life. Because all life that we see on our planet has one single origin. Everything on Earth is actually related, and like truly related in the sense that like we share common ancestors with everything there. So let me illustrate this with an example. Imagine you were to go someplace and somebody was to say, define a game. And you were to go there and you had only ever seen in your whole life, say Monopoly, and maybe some games that were just like Monopoly. You would define a game in that sense as something where a lot of people sit around a table, there's dice, there's little cards, it's competitive, one person wins. And you're like, okay, that's the definition of a game. You go someplace else, you see Settlers of Catan. Yeah, all those same criteria apply, great. Okay, so you feel confident about this. But let's say you went and you found somebody playing solitaire. It doesn't fit most of those criteria. Yeah, dominoes, another example. Or let's go crazy. What if you see somebody playing rugby? So it's interesting because we think we know what life is, but really we just know Earth life. And we may see other things where we just decide a lot of the criteria we're using don't actually matter nearly as much as we thought they did, because they're unique to Earth life, but we're actually interested in something else. We don't know what we're interested in because we don't know what's possible yet. So.
So that was an inherent theme in this episode.
Yeah.
Was that they were, trying to come to terms with something that's so outside the box that they didn't think possible. That didn't match the criteria for how they defined life.
And this seems to be a common theme in Star Trek in general. I feel like we've seen a couple of these episodes already just in this season. We've seen it beautifully helped out by Mohamed in Star Trek Discovery, hydrocarbons, if I remember correctly.
Good memory.
But, that seek out new life is the motto for the people flying on a spaceship. So that's kind of what they're doing. But Mohamed, I guess you kind of answered the question, because when Beverly, at first she was explaining the things that we, the qualifiers that we have to determine whether it's life. And at first I was like, oh, this is great. Really interesting. I played it back and then I was like, wait a second, movement, algae doesn't move. I mean, so there are a few things in there, but I guess what you're saying is we should just cut that out completely and just take it on a case-by-case basis.
That's a radical view. I'll say that. I mean, I think there are a lot of exobiologists out there who would strongly disagree with me, and they would say we should actually try to come up with a really good definition. I feel like if we're doing that, we're kind of spitting in the wind, because we don't really know. I mean, we'll see things and we won't decide that they're important until we see them often, and we'll say, okay, this is something we actually care about. There's actually a future episode of Star Trek, not this one, where Data has a conversation with Beverly about life, and he actually brings up fire as an example. He says, well, fire can reproduce, right? Because you can have fire and it goes someplace else and it makes more fire as it's going. It's the sustained chemical reaction, which is a lot of what we think of as life. It has a lot of these characteristics, but we've already decided, like, we don't count that. When we see a fire, we're not trying to preserve it because it's a life form or something like that.
All right. Huh.
I kind of was thinking about the different kingdoms of life that we classify, like the animal, plant, bacteria. What would this particular life form that we encounter, what category or classification would that be under, or would we have to make a new one for that?
We would absolutely have to make a new one for that one. That's a great question. We would absolutely have to make a new one for that. And it's interesting because when you have the kingdoms of life, you can actually make this tree of life in terms of how they're related. With this thing, it probably isn't related to us. It's probably something that just arose completely independently from us. So it wouldn't fit any of our kingdoms at all, for sure. No, it's a great question.
And the other thing that kind of stood out to me, Mohammed, was that a lot of the stuff that they were talking about when referring to this life form were actually chemicals that we are familiar with. Like,
That's right.
they mentioned saline water. They mentioned a lot of uh, certain elements that we are used to. So, are those elements that we are used to? Is it the combination of them that makes them something new? Because we're not really dealing with an alternate kind of a different substance that's not on the table of elements, right? We're dealing with stuff that we're familiar with.
Yeah, they're all things we're familiar with. I agree with that. The difference was the silicon basis, because we don't really have silicon as a basis for anything in us. So that was the most significant difference from the rest of it. But that does bring up an interesting question, just in the sense of, when we have something like, basically, what are there combinations of chemicals that are much more likely to be associated with life than others? And the answer to that is it often very much depends on the environment. So on Earth, aside from the fact we obviously see the life is carbon-based and it has water as a solvent, it also makes sense. Let's use water as a solvent. It makes sense because water can be in liquid state here in most environments here on Earth. If you were to go someplace where the temperature is a lot colder, having water as a solvent for life doesn't actually make sense. What you might want is something like liquid ammonia or something which is liquid at much colder temperatures. And then you could still have that, basically the chemical reaction still be operating. But it's specific to the environment in which it's found. Now, carbon and silicon, the reason that we tend to see those, carbon is great because if you remember where carbon is on the periodic table of elements, do you remember the periodic table of elements?
Who doesn't remember exactly where? Oh boy, I could write the whole thing out right now.
Oh, God.
Well, carbon is great because carbon can bind to 4 other atoms, right? Whereas oxygen can only bind to 2. Carbon combined to 4. So in that sense, you can make really complex things with it. Silicon is right below carbon on the periodic table. So it can also do the same thing. So that's why people have speculated if there was something that wasn't carbon-based, maybe silicon would be good. Now, what this doesn't touch, and this comes back to you just asked, Cirroc, in the context of this saline and things like that, is would silicon work in this environment? The tricky thing is silicon probably wouldn't work great if there's a lot of like water and oxygen, because carbon, again, you can make these sort of carbon-carbon bonds and make the chains of carbon. Silicon can do that as well, but silicon would actually rather bind to like oxygen or hydrogen. So if you put it in water, like it could fall apart. So not an ideal thing. And the original series episode with the Horta, when they had the silicon-based life form, McCoy actually made the comment saying, well, silicon-based life is physiologically impossible, especially in an oxygen atmosphere. So it was interesting that he raised that very specifically back in the original series as a problem with silicon-based life.
But not
my other question,
though.
Not impossible. Not impossible.
My other question, because this is kind of a thought that went through my head when I was watching the episode, was Data kept making comparisons to this life form and a computer.
Yeah.
Right. And so, is there a connection, for example, with artificial intelligence and the way we're kind of moving in that direction and this kind of a life form? Is there a similarity there?
So this is a very Star Trek thing, and you'll see as we get to later episodes in this series, that exact thing that you just brought up, Cirroc, that was a brilliant insight. That will come up a lot. Now, I will say Star Trek in general tends to, whenever they find new life, it's almost always new intelligent life. They rarely find like that was the example used earlier, Ryan, of an algae. They don't find this like weird algae and then make a big deal of it. They just kind of move on if they see that. But if it can like talk to them, yeah, right. If it can talk to them, they're all in for it. Now, what's going to happen later in the series, there's going to be a lot of discussion about whether Data is alive and, does he count as life in the context of what you said? And some of these categories will be applied to him. Like, well, does he have physiology? Could he reproduce? Can he do these things? It's touchy in the sense of like, can we count something like that as alive? Ultimately, people talk like there's this ultimate truth to that question. Like the answer is yes, or the answer is no. The thing is like, life is just a word. We're going to define it. We can choose how we want to define it. We can choose that we're going to include things like that or not.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But no, it's a brilliant question.
Here's what I want to know from you, Mohamed.
Mm-hmm.
The entire first half of the episode basically was all about terraforming.
Yeah.
We all know that terraforming is basically making something that's uninhabitable into habitable, which I think is still theoretical. I don't know if we've ever done that, not on any kind. Yeah. I mean, we've done it in areas on Earth, I guess, with
Las
irrigation or whatever.
Vegas.
Yeah, exactly.
That's true.
100%, exactly.
That's actually a great example. That's a great example.
But can you kind of walk us through, if you're able to, kind of the stages that they mentioned and the difficulties that may arise?
I don't remember the stages they mentioned, but let's pick a concrete example. Let's say if you wanted to terraform Mars, what would you have to do to make this happen, right? So there's a lot of challenges. I mean, generally speaking, when people talk about this, they say, well, we want to have like an atmosphere where we can breathe or something like that. Because to some extent, if you just have a bubble that you're living in, then what did you terraform? I mean, your terraforming could be you just live in your rocket forever kind of thing. But on Mars, if you were to try to get an atmosphere, the challenge there is it doesn't really work there, because the combination of the low gravity and the absence of a good magnetic field there, Mars can't keep its atmosphere there. So if you were to try to make an atmosphere on Mars, you'd have to just continually add more and more atmosphere all the time. You essentially like have these big tanks that are blowing out or something, and it would keep getting lost. It would keep getting like blown off by solar winds and things like that too. So that's a big challenge. Protection from cosmic rays and other sorts of radiation, because we tend to think of space as being dangerous because it's really cold. That's obviously true, but if you were to be exposed to space for just a very brief time, you're less likely to die from the cold and more likely to die from massive radiation going through your body. Like massive amounts of radiation. Because just for a few seconds, the reason you wouldn't feel super cold really fast is because there's no air there to suck the heat off your body. Right. So you would get cold, but it's just through radiation. There's nothing conducting the heat away from you. So it actually would take, a little bit longer than say the radiation, which is just hitting you right there. So yeah, that's another piece of terraforming. So you want to protect people from this, incredible amounts of radiation that are just being plummeting through there. And then ultimately you want to like set it up where you can actually start growing the foods that we eat and have water that's stable there and create basically an ecosystem. So yeah, it's hard.
Under the conditions that that they were talking about, Dr. Mendel was talking about that they have as requirements for terraforming planets. Is that a possibility under those certain conditions that they were talking about being available?
I didn't write down actually what he said, so I don't remember the specifics.
Okay.
I remember he said that one of the things they looked for is they made sure that there wasn't already life there because they wanted to make sure not to kill off the life that was there. But I don't remember what he said the other conditions were.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I didn't have them down. I think actually it was mass, gravity, the correct rotation, balance of day and night. Okay. Yeah, those were some of the mathematical, at least, or physics.
Mm-hmm. Those all make sense.
In terms of temperature and environment, they obviously have to start with something that's like sustainable to us or hospitable to us, temperature-wise, because they can't terraform the atmosphere, the temperature, right?
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, those things are interrelated too, because your atmosphere will hold in the temperature. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Cirroc, that's actually something I didn't catch. You mentioned mass, gravity, variations in temperature, day and night, right? Or something like that.
Yeah.
Mohamed, can you go over very quickly why those kinds of things are important with tides and with light and dark and all that? Why are those important to creating life?
Yeah, so it's not so much for creating life as it is sustaining life. I don't think the goal for terraforming is to actually just make new life. It's just to make it so that life that's there would be able to survive. Mass is what creates gravity, right? So you need to have gravity both for the people to exist on there, but also just because that's what's going to hold your atmosphere down on the planet, right? What were the other ones? I forget. There was the day
and night, heat and cold.
Yeah, I think those are. I don't know the answer to that part. My guess is that those two things are probably interrelated. That like if you essentially, let's say you had a planet that was fixed where it was one side was always facing the sun and the other side was always not facing the sun, your temperature difference there is going to be crazy, right?
Right. That's why they mentioned the balance of day and night. I have a question for you, because this was one of the things that came up in the episode that I thought raised a very good question. And the premise was trying to communicate is a sign of intelligent life, right? Because they mentioned that they had found life, but then they said that it tried to communicate, and that was essentially evidence that it was intelligent life. And so that is my question. is the quotient for intelligence communication when we talk about life form?
That's a great question. I don't think there is a universal answer to that question, because that is such a fundamental question right there. Because I mean, a lot of things will communicate. Like when a dog growls at you, it's communicating, right? You know, do we count them as intelligent life? I mean, it depends on if you're a dog lover, I guess.
They are, damn it.
Mine is damn smart. Mine is a damn smart dog. Okay. Smarter than some people I know.
And they do communicate. I mean, they are communicating. So
they're 100% communicating. Yeah.
And so even on the latest Star Trek, I think it was Discovery, when they were talking about the mycelial network and how the communication of the fungi in that kind of way also works. So they are sticking true to the idea that communicating is intelligent.
Yeah. They're being internally consistent. I'll give them that.
Right.
I think it's one of those things of all A are B, but not all B are A. Like if something's trying to communicate, it's a sign of intelligent life. But not all intelligent life will be trying to communicate. Because they'd have to have the will to. It's
true.
You know.
Yeah. As long as you keep the
on
sign
Sundays,
up.
I don't try to communicate.
Yeah. It's tricky too, because when we say communicate too, there's a presumed intentionality. Just because we're humans, we tend to think of it as presumed intentionality. But you could imagine something like, let's say that there's a response to a plant that when it's poked a certain way, it flicks. And it's just been something that has just been programmed to do that, because when it did that, it had more seeds, and then when it didn't do that, it had less seeds. So over time, that spread.
Or the coloration of a plant is communicating as well.
Exactly, and most people would not consider that intelligence, right? But they're, like you said, a sign of, I'm good with that, but like an absolute indicator of.
Yeah, it's almost reflective of an intelligent design in its makeup, but not necessarily that the thing itself is intelligent, right?
And this appearance of design tends to come from natural selection, right? Just because if it has a trait and that trait is heritable and it leads to having more kids, that trait will spread, you know, and it ends up over time looking like it's designed when in fact it's just natural selection. Yeah. There was some interesting stuff too that I remember Geordi at one point when he was looking into the place where they got those what do they call them, microbrains or something?
Yeah, it was microbrain is what they called it. I was like, come on.
Crystals, yeah.
Yeah. There was an interesting thing where he made this comment like, there's nothing but basic elements in there. And I was like, what? What does that mean? Because that would not be alive. Because if you're talking about basic elements, it's just the stuff on that periodic table. So it's like, oh, look, there's carbon just by itself. Right. Like, yeah, that's not. I don't think there's any way carbon just by itself can be alive. So,
speaking of which, a very quick correction. I checked on chalk and charcoal for everybody that's screaming in the live chat about it, I'm sure. So chalk is a compound called calcium carbonate. Molecule of chalk is formed by combination of an atom of calcium, carbon, and oxygen. So I don't know if that makes it carbon-based or if it just has carbon in it. And charcoal, the impure form of graphitic carbon obtained as a residue when carbonaceous material is partially burned or heated with limited access of air. So that was fun.
Speak English.
I know. I'm like, are these words making sense? I'm just reading the words, but they're not entering my brain.
Well,
having PTSD.
One other thing I liked about this life is that it had some things that we don't have, like that it actually. Remember, they could pick up the electrical impulses of us. I mean, that was the thing. Because remember when they stood close to things and started glowing.
Like
so
ants.
We can't do that, but sharks can actually do that. They actually have electroreceptors, so they can actually pick up signals from the musculature, just from the electrical signals of the musculature of fish nearby. That's part of how they home in and like, oh, there it is, going after it.
Oh shit! So I thought the whole time I could just stay still in the water when a shark was around, but he can still.
You can tell your heart's beating.
He can feel my electricity. Oh shit! I'm gonna be. I'll be flailing now that I know that. I think that's a better option for me.
Is it all skates or just sharks, like rays and stuff?
I'm not sure how broad I'm pretty sure skates are, but I wouldn't swear to it. I'd look it up and see, but I'm not positive about the answer to that.
Last time I looked something up, I destroyed the conversation. I'm not doing it again. Were you going to say something, Denise?
Oh, I was going to say, and dolphins can kind of scan you with a sonar kind of. You can actually feel it in your body.
Oh, wow.
It's really interesting. I mean, if you've ever, I went down to a dolphin research center in Florida and got in with them, and they love children the most, women second, men not so much. And
I don't blame them.
This, you can hear this, like they kind of scan you. They send out this sonar scan.
Yeah.
See, they can detect if you've got, ailments or you've had surgeries, or according to these researchers. So, I don't know. It's really, I wonder if they can pick up frequencies.
My sister never saw this episode, and yet she came up with the exact same nickname for me. Microbrain.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It must be a.
And if I had a sister, she would call me an ugly bag of mostly water, too. So we're kind of the same boat there.
There it is.
Mohamed, we got to run in just a second here, but I know you had one more thing that you wanted to.
I had one nitpick. I was going to say that this was where Beverly made the comment about the scientific method. And what she said was you observe, theorize, and then attempt to prove it. Now, this is nitpicky of me, but I did not like that last part, attempt to prove it. Like, no, you test it. That is not the same as attempt to prove, because attempt to prove it means that you are aiming for one result.
There's confirmation bias there.
Exactly.
Ooh,
so yeah, I didn't like that. Yeah.
Oh, very good. Very.
All right, everybody.
Yeah.
If you are not way smarter right now than you were 25 minutes ago, you need to listen again. But Mohamed, this was so cool. We really appreciate you, putting lipstick on a pig of this episode. Just kidding. This episode was great. No, but you really made this super fun, and we really appreciate you, man.
Yeah.
I love you guys. Thanks for having me.
Oh, come back. Come back and
love to.
Babysit us again. Walk us
Totally entertain us, babysit.
Wow. Explain it all for us. Mohamed explains it all for us.
Actually, everybody go check out Mohamed online. Speaking of explains, where can they find you, Mohamed?
Oh, yeah. On YouTube, I have a series called BioTrekkie Explains. So if you look up BioTrekkie in YouTube, you can actually see a bunch of videos talking about various episodes. Not this one, though. I should make one about this one.
You should.
Yeah, you should.
But maybe we just did. So it's good.
And you can find him on Twitter at MAF Noor, if I remember correctly, right?
That's correct. Very good. Thank you.
Great. Everybody stick around. We'll be right back. The next segment, we're going to be even smarter. It's going to be so great. We'll be right back on.
No promises, no promises.
Well, hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Seventh Rule with Denise Crosby and Cirroc Lofton. OMG.
Hello.
Look at Denise's shirt, everybody. It is the Seventh Rule self-sealing stem bolt shirt, created, of course, by J.J. Lendl. Look how gorgeous that is, and her shirt.
Nice.
Everybody, you can
I
get
love the
that
pink
shirt.
on you, Denise. Looks great.
Looks great. You
Looks
can get
really
that
good on you.
shirt at the link in the description box below. It is the Seventh Rule Teespring store, or just the Spring store. You can get your very own Seventh Rule shirt. Can't promise that you'll look as good as Denise does, but you'll look pretty good.
Yeah. This is lovely. I love it. It fits like a glove. It's really good quality.
Mm-hmm.
Get one now, folks.
It's wonderful.
We need
I
a
like the
disclaimer
colors.
that says doesn't actually fit like a glove, fits like a shirt. But well, Denise, do you remember anything about this particular episode? Do you remember talking about it one beam of light, or like 15 special guest stars on the bridge one day?
Not a clue. And Corey Allen who directed our pilot. So I'm sure I was, thrilled to see him. He was such a lovely gentleman. And, but I couldn't, I don't have one iota of memory about this.
Everybody at home, speaking of remembering, I forgot to say the trivioid. So here they come real quick. The Enterprise is visiting a group terraforming Valara 3. Director Mandel keeps Captain Picard waiting. Bjorn Benson rocks a fly mullet. Louisa is as open as she appears. Arthur is sent to the hydraulic chamber. A laser drill has malfunctioned. A Federation recon expedition certified Valara 3 lifeless. Yeah, they said that like 20 times. Deanna Troi says terraformers are often obsessive. Some sand has sparkling effect, and humans are ugly giant bags of mostly water. That is a quote mentioned quite often among Star Trek fandom, as you may have guessed. Anyway, well, Cirroc, is this about as much science as you could handle this episode?
Yeah, there was a lot of science. There was a lot of science, but I do think that it was a good episode. Yeah. There wasn't a lot of story, but I did like some of the elements. For example, I like the fact that
carbon,
the weight,
hydrogen, ammonia.
No, I like that the away team was properly constructed to me. You know, that it was Riker, Troi, Data, Lieutenant Yar, and LaForge. And that was a nice little away team. I also like that Lieutenant Yar took initiative when she saw that the guy was the lasered dead body was there and they were trying to disarm the room. She was the first one to say, I'll go in there and take a look at what's going on and take him back to the station. I like that initiative right there that she took. I really enjoyed some of LaForge's delivery. When Geordi does some lines, there's just some moments where he's exceptionally good at delivering certain ways and certain lines. So the one that I thought was great was when he said, I see colors and rhythms and complex harmonies, when he was talking about, you know, looking at what he saw and just the way he said it. It was a close up on his face, but you can, it's like you can feel him looking through these artificial eyes, and you can feel a sense of wonder and all of that in his tone and expression. So I really love the way LeVar Burton delivers his lines at certain points and throughout the course of the show. And then the other thing that jumped out at me was the actor who plays Dr. Mendel, or is that his name? Mandel? Yeah. Howie Mandel.
Yeah.
Director Mandel.
Last name
I thought I thought he was great. I thought he was a great match for Captain Picard and Patrick Stewart's acting style and the way he likes to go, the bravado he brings, the kind of Shakespearean, you know, performance that he brings to the Picard character. I thought this director Mandel was a very qualified match for the energy. He had a gravitas. He had a certain statesmanship about him that felt senior. It felt like he was challenging Picard in a very intellectual and kind of seniority type of way. And I really enjoyed his performance. I thought he was spot on as this character because he left things ambiguous. I didn't know whether he was really guilty or, you know, what his involvement was. He kept that part of his performance you know, not revealing to us what his intentions were. So I thought he was just an excellent addition to the cast in this episode.
Yeah, that's an interesting element to this story, because you get a sense that he's hiding something, you know, that he clearly doesn't want them to come down. And when he sends the guy that gets, you know, killed, like, shouldn't you be working? You feel like he's like, did he lead them to that?
Right.
You know, like what? But he claims he absolutely knew nothing about this life form. But it was interesting how it was played, because did he or didn't he? I'm still a little unsure.
They suggested at it, especially when he sends him to bed or whatever. It looked like he was sending him to bed, right? He told him to go to the hyperbaric chamber or the hydraulic chamber or something.
Oh, to get to work. Yeah, he was like set.
Okay.
Like I knew. I mean, you kind of knew something was going to happen, because his reaction was, What now?
Yeah.
And
Like it was an awkward and weird time to do that. He was like
I mean,
this is
yeah, there
yeah.
was something off about that. And, why hadn't they ever looked down that same hole to see those flashing lights? Like the crew has been on there, the terraformers have been on there for years. And it took Geordi and Data to look down there to discover that.
Yeah.
Maybe they had looked down, but they just didn't, decipher it as well or figure it out or the one fellow did say that he noticed some things.
Well, the sparkly sand would take forms, take shapes, but because they weren't looking for life, they didn't see life. But I would think that
they were looking for life in all the wrong places.
there. So but I mean, they're looking down those chutes. I don't know. You're
to add to your point, Denise, and kind of bring it around to what I'm thinking. When Counselor Troy says she senses a deliberate concealment,
right,
from this director, right? What is he concealing if he doesn't believe there's life and he didn't have anything to do with the murder and there is nothing funny going on? What is he concealing then?
Right. And it was growing in intensity. Each time they got more, they got closer to the coming in and the conversation was continuing, his anxiety ramped up.
Right. So what was he concealing if he wasn't aware of the life form and he wasn't concealing that it existed? Exactly. I don't understand where the anxiety was coming from and what the concealment was about. So they started us off basically pointing at him saying there's something off with this guy.
Right.
And in the long run, there really wasn't much that we can accuse him of being guilty of, really. He's, maybe
unless he knew.
But the way they're claiming he really didn't know.
But what he is concealing, unless she's off.
Unless she's off. Right?
So there is something, it kind of confused me, this whole episode, to be honest. I mean, that's not the only part that was confusing to me, but I mean, the intention of this man and the station and not wanting them to come, and this gentleman being told to go into that room and then dies right away. I felt something nefarious was being set up.
Yeah.
Like something's off. They've been alone on this thing, and God knows they've discovered something and they're hoarding it or they're refining it, or something's going on that they don't want the Federation a part of, to be aware of. They weren't expecting visitors.
You know what it felt to me? It felt to me as though this were a B plot. Like the whole, looking at the light, it felt like that was a B plot for 2 or 3 characters to be working on while a different kind of main plot was happening. But I suppose the main, the A plot, I guess, is just about, the characters that they meet and what's going on there. So it was, I don't want to say it was a little slow for me, but I just felt like the good stuff in this episode was, the concept, the theme, the science of it all, but it was a little, as far as the story, that there wasn't a ton of story. It was mostly just, some really interesting concepts and some good characters. What I liked best about it, though, was the groupings of characters. And Cirroc, you touched on that a minute ago. But, when we go on an away mission, I always like to note who's on this away mission and why. When they're, in the doctor's office, who's in that doctor's office and why. This time we had a Wesley Crusher sighting in a very appropriate manner. They're trying to figure out the science and biology of something. You've got the captain, the doctor, you've got Geordi and Data, and you had Wesley Crusher sitting there in case he can catch something that other people aren't. And so I thought that the groupings of the characters, and I just like to see the relationships and how they're used, their expertise are used, and how the characters are used amongst themselves. And I thought that was, to me, the best part of the story outside of just the science of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I did like the groupings as well. I thought going back to Geordi, he also said, LaForge to Enterprise, we have a problem. And I love the way he said it. I thought it was spot on. Worf, when he does the whole, but is he alive? But is it alive? And the computer says unknown. And he's like, I wasn't asking you. I thought it was another little funny moment. There's nuggets of moments, but then there's also certain moments that don't seem consistent to me. And they fall in line of this very weird thing that's happening between Troy and Riker. Now, did Diana Troy tell Riker to go talk to the girl because he'll have better chances with her, right?
I was like, what?
I mean, it was suggestive, right?
On two levels. Like,
yes.
You're supporting this, misogynistic kind of sexualized. I mean, basically you're saying get sexy with her and see if you can squeeze anything out of her. Like, and maybe actually go and,
he did do it.
Go and get it on with her and see if she talks.
Take your shirt off and see what you can find out.
Yeah, exactly. I thought, I mean, where is this coming from?
Why is she egging that on you too? Like, she's as a woman, as an empath who's so to speak connected in this kind of a way, she's basically saying, yeah, I know you're a horn dog, so go scratch that itch. And to me, that's like, it's kind of awkward.
He did walk into, and it was kind of like the lights were dim. She's crying, and he saunters in slowly. And I wrote this down. He goes, "Mind a visitor?" And I was just like, "Whoa!" This episode just totally took a different turn. Like, it was all about science, and then suddenly he's just coming in, like adjusting his tie. Hey, what's that?
It's the Riker sexed up, approach to the hot-looking girl on the ship. I mean, we've seen this how many times. But that it was encouraged by Troy. So now it throws a complete wrench in what is this relationship?
That's why a lot of people in Star Trek fandom believe that Troy and Riker are in a polyamorous relationship.
I think so. I would have to say,
but it's kind of one-sided, right?
Right.
Well, I guess, you had the potential guy coming to marry her, and but I don't know. I don't remember if Troy.
But that's an old fling. He gets the new ones.
Yeah. He gets in the moment.
Yeah, he gets
whatever planet we're visiting, he gets.
He's always excited for a new mission.
Husband,
all right, new mission.
Gets like the old guy that was going to marry her already. But he gets all the new stuff. I just thought it was weird. And then he says to her, it's very beautiful. I could arrange for you to see it if you like. And I'm like, what is he talking about?
What? I tried to rewind it. What was he talking about? Did he actually say something?
I think the writer just accidentally got a piece from another script and dropped it right in there, because there was this entire tone shift for about 45 seconds, and then went right back. And by the way, this
woman is crying. She feels devastated that she has crossed the prime directive.
Predatory, man.
She's dedicated her life to this particular science and this terraforming, and this is her life, and it means a lot to her. And here she is having this emotional breakdown, and here you come sauntering in like, hey, you want to.
I couldn't help but notice you were state.
I mean, wow.
It's too predatory to me.
It was a cringe factor for me. It made me cringe.
Me too. And I just felt like it just doesn't. It just makes their relation, if they have a relationship, I don't know if you call what Troy and Riker are at this moment. And it's okay because like before you get married to somebody, you're dating them, and before you're dating them, they're single and you're single, and they could do whatever they want to do as a single person. So there's stages in relationships as they grow, and you become closer. You decide to leave other people and other options. You close the door on the other options, and you dedicate your life to the significant other that you want to choose, right? And to me, that's normal. But at this point, it feels like they've already made that decision to dedicate to each other, but yet they're not.
Yes.
And so it's
why I'm so
weird.
Confused.
Yeah.
It's not tracking, you have this really overreaction, when Troy's mother comes and brings the man she's supposed to marry. You've got Riker having, a fit, despondent, a jealous, emotional, really reacting to this. And then the next episode, he's making it with, his chest hairs out and the whole thing,
Angel
the whole
one.
chest, with the woman, and you're going, well, wait a minute, what? So I guess you can, but she can't, or what happened to your reaction? Back there. It was a reaction from someone who really is invested in this woman. Well, if you're invested in Troy, what are you doing?
Or just not be one or the other. That's all I'm saying. Okay.
Right. But you set it up that way. You set it up that way. It's like they set it up. It's almost like they set it up, but then they said, no, but we need him to be the Kirk character. We need him to be the Romeo and the good looking stud on the ship. So we got to play that aspect. And forget about we'll come back to that.
By the way, now that you say that, Deep Space Nine did not have that. We didn't have
they had Bashir, who was the failed attempt at that.
He was the handsome guy, but he wasn't able to get the girl.
Right. That was the joke, was that he couldn't do it. Yeah.
He would always put his foot in his mouth or fumble the moment, but so we didn't have the guy who gets laid every episode, who's like the stud of the world.
Mm-hmm.
We did have love stories with like Odo and Kira, which is a great love story, and it was a genuine love story where they were dedicated to each other and they were willing to make that kind of sacrifice. But this one it's almost reminiscent of this open relationship type of mentality that I think was, when I think of the 70s, I think of, kind of free love, open.
I think you're almost giving it too much credit, that it really is tracking that open, free love. I mean, that would be cool. I think more to the point that, again, it's Roddenberry and Maurice Hurley and these guys from the 60s original story that, created Kirk and created his swagger and created his thing with women, all the different alien women he'd, be with. And they want to replicate that. And they're doing it with Frakes.
They want to replicate. All right. Hey, but we got to go in just a second. But speaking of singles, it's time for the home run of the day. Look at that segue. What do you think, Denise? Who gets the home run of the day today?
Oh boy. This was a tough one for me. I was watching the time on this one. I got to be honest. It was slow moving. So
I did too. I checked it. I was like, only 20 minutes.
I know. That's me too. And then I went back, okay, 15 left. And, I was checking it periodically. I just, wow. Well, I guess, I got to find something here. So I think Director Mandel, that guy, he just brought a presence, and I just believed him. I loved his delivery, his just theatricality, and like you said, as we've talked about this before, to come in on an established set with talking space babble and science, and to own it, and is not easy. I've seen so many actors flail in this part, or pull me aside and go, oh my God, how do you do this? How do you do this? Or they'll break into some strange Shakespearean dialect that they've never done before in their life. They're suddenly speaking Shakespearean English, because it's Star Trek. And it is complicated. So he did a fine job.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to agree with you, Denise, on that. I think he really stood out to me. Like his performance was great. He just kept himself composed. He's obviously a great actor. Would love to see him in other things that he's done, because that's how good he is. He makes you say, "Oh, what else have I seen him in, or what else could he do good?" I thought he was a very good match for Picard, who's, like I said, this great stage, known as this great stage performer. So I like that. But I think for me, the real home run I'm going to have to give to Mohamed Noor, Dr. Noor.
I was considering that too.
Yeah. I think he makes the complex look a lot more simple for me. I like the way he breaks things down. I love the enthusiasm behind the science, and I have vague ideas of some of the concepts they were talking about, because I did study these things in school. But you forget a lot of this stuff as you move on and don't apply it in your life.
Right.
And so it's just definitely fun revisiting those topics with Mohamed, because Dr. Noor is such a inspirational kind of teacher that he makes things really fun. Absolutely. So that's who my home run's going to, because I'm
pinch hitter.
I was watching this episode just like looking at the clock. Yeah. And I was like, come on, this has to go somewhere else, but it didn't really. And they made a good effort. They kept it's science fiction with a whole lot of science. And so they're staying true to the genre. It just was a little bit too slow for me.
I thought the same thing about Mohamed, but I took it another step, which was whomever the science advisor was in this episode obviously did a great job with that. I looked for the person's name, couldn't find it. So for the unnamed science advisor, you get my home run of the day. Let's give a very quick special thanks to our friends Homer Frizzell, Dr. Anne-Marie Segal, Eve England out in Wales, Yvette Blackmon-Tom, TJ Jackson-Bey, Bill Victor Arucan, Titus Mohler, Darlena Marie, Dr. Mohamed Noor, what do you know? Tierney C. Dieckmann, Anna Post, Anil O. Polat, Joe Balsarotti, Mike Gu, Dequeue, Neal Akasaka, Justine Norton-Kertson, Dr. Stephanie Baker, Carrie Schwent, Faith Howell, Edward Foltz, My Live from Tokyo, Matt Boardman, Chris McGee, Justin Weir, Jake Barrett, Jane Jorgensen, Henry Unger, Allison Leach-Heid, Jed Thompson, Steve Case, a.k.a. Joe Bugbuster, and of course, Dr. Susan V. Gruner and Jason Okun, some of which you will see, some of whom you will see on the other side. Stick around. We'll be right back with the free-for-all on The Seventh Rule. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to The Seventh Rule. This is the free-for-all. Denise and Cirroc are here, of course, as is Melissa Longo. Hi. Is live in Tokyo. Dr. Susan V. Gruner is here. We've got Jason Okun with a radical poster in the background. Allison Leach-Heid is here, matching Melissa Longo. Great designs. We have Carrie Schwent here, matching Denise Crosby. Is that maroon or burgundy?
I'd say maroon.
All right. Faith Howell is here on the D, and our buddy, the Dark Lord. Well, I'm sorry, it's not the Dark Lord. It's an ugly bag of mostly wine, McGee. Very nice. Very nice, Chris. Excellent.
I've got the bags of mostly water.
Oh, is that what that is? Great. All right.
There's a story.
There were no non-appearance mentions today, were there?
I didn't catch any.
All right, that makes it official. Jake Sisko guesses the IMDb score.
This was probably in the high 5 ranges, maybe like 5.9, 6.0. Somewhere in that range.
High 5.
Like Ryan would say, rude.
Yeah. What do you think, Denise? You think it's somewhere around a high 5 or a 6?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm gonna say 5.8.
Mm-hmm.
Does anybody else have any guesses? You guys are really pissing Sue off right now.
I'm gonna guess
6.4.
I didn't look this time, but I'm gonna guess 6.8.
Whoa.
Message-wise, it's an easy 10. Execution-wise, I'm going to have to agree with a lot of you.
You notice how Melissa had to tell us that she didn't look because she guessed an exactly a 6.8, which is what it is.
Really? Really?
That's why she had to put that caveat. She's like, I didn't look, you guys, but I'm guessing it's a 6.8.
I didn't look this time.
Excellent work.
Wow.
Sure, Melissa.
Higher than
I
would
didn't look.
give,
I
think.
swear I wasn't looking.
Excellent.
I didn't, I swear.
Well, Melissa, can you start us off and tell us why you do think it's a 6.8?
I do think it's a 6.8 for a couple of reasons. Because of the ugly giant bags of water, mostly water. And Data's line, surrounded by a flexible container. How do you know how flexible it is? Anyway, I liked this episode for a couple of reasons that I'll point out. One is Louisa Kim. I really liked her character. I loved the energy that she exudes. And I think that's unique to the actress. And I think that's what brought it out. I don't know. She's got something that just exudes, something that draws me to her. And I couldn't get enough of watching her. But I also like that she was a woman in science, and it didn't feel weird or forced or like they were trying to hit us over the head. Oh, look, we put a woman in science. It felt like it was normal, the way it's supposed to feel. So I really like that. And, but overall, I like the question this episode asks, and that's what constitutes life. And will we let our own arrogance, define that and not look beyond what we don't know? Or would we be open to the discovery and exploration that there are things that we can't even fathom to be true? And that's what I really liked about this episode. And one last thing, I like that they seem to use Troy's strengths more in this episode too.
Mm-hmm. Good point. By the way, Louisa Kim, played by Elizabeth Lindsay. I heard a rumor about her. I just checked it to verify. She was Miss Hawaii.
Ooh.
It is confirmed. Miss Hawaii.
Ooh.
Miss South Dakota, Allison Leach-Heid is here, everybody. I think. I didn't verify that, though.
Born in North Dakota.
Oh, Miss North Dakota.
So far off. What do you think of this episode?
I've always liked this episode for many different reasons. everyone in the cast had something to do, and it all felt natural. Tasha was the security chief. Troy was the counselor. Dr. Crusher was studying a new life form. It all made sense. And we had great, I liked the new groups we've got of the cast, because we don't always get Picard and Crusher and Wesley and Data and Geordi. Like, that's a new group. I really liked that. So we got a nice mix of all the cast members together. I would have loved if they would have added the scene where Troy and Tasha got together to talk about all the terraformers when they went over their personnel files. That would have been a great scene to have. But yeah, I always liked this because, as Melissa said, we're talking about what is life. Just because this life form isn't what we are used to doesn't mean it's not life. And I think that's a very important question for everyone to ask in where we are now. Just because someone's life doesn't look like your own doesn't mean it's not worth value. So it's all worth respect. So that's why I've always liked this episode. And I want to give a kudos to LeVar Burton when he's doing the scene where he's looking at the life form down the tube. His face is just beautiful in how he's emoting all that excitement and joy of seeing a brand new life form. So that's why I like the episode.
Very good stuff, Allison. You echoed a couple of our sentiments during the recording, and you gave a shout out to George Harrison, that everybody knows sings the song "What Is Life." So good knowledge there. Jason Okun is not amused by my Beatles knowledge, but he's got a lot of Star Trek knowledge to impart on us right now. What do you think of this episode?
Yeah, certainly. The Beatles knowledge would not be my knowledge, but Star Trek maybe is. To be honest, I really want to like the episode. There's certainly sort of this germ of a science fiction idea that's certainly very interesting, but I think the execution is a little, could have used a little more work. I think the script could have used a little more work. It seemed like there may have been too many cooks in that kitchen. I mean, as Allison said, it's very nice that everybody has something to do, and it was appropriate. And Wesley didn't save the ship, which was great. For once, everything was in its place, and I think, frankly, the performances of the regulars were right on point, which was good to see. I'm not sure that was entirely true of the guest cast, and save some of that for later. I think overall, this is sort of the next generation's take on The Devil in the Dark, the original series episode. Had very, very similar themes. I mean, there was executed quite a bit better, but that's kind of a different point. And it was interesting to see Corey Allen come back and direct this. And Denise, I don't know if you noticed any difference from the pilot, how he was with the cast, and I'm just curious what your experience with Corey Allen was.
Well, as I was, it's funny because as I was telling Cirroc and Ryan, I have zero memory of making this episode. Absolutely zero. I only know Corey directed it because his name is on the credit, which I know that we would have been thrilled to have him back because we really, really loved him. He was, our first leader. He was so kind and gentle with us and caring, and we loved everything about Corey. I just remember that during, I can remember Encounter at Farpoint, much more than this episode. But when we were experiencing, these alien sparkling creatures, and, he would talk us through it in a way that was it was so wonderfully endearing, just see the creature, feel the light form, you're in awe, you're surprised, you're slightly scared, go gently. He would just, this wonderful way he would have about him. So I am sure that we just took such delight in having him back for the first time after the pilot. But it feels to me watching this that we're all kind of settling in a little bit better. We're kind of feeling a little more owning of our space and our character. I think Patrick at one point even like rubs his neck in this episode. You know, we're beginning to have human behavior that we have in everyday life. Of course you would, but we're in the beginning, we're like these officers on a spaceship, and it's like all human beingness left the room. You know, we're these officers in our positions and touching panels and, you know, playing all of this stuff. But no, you know that people would be, you know, laughing or scratching their butt or what, you know, whatever people do, you know, in real life. So it's starting to shift a little bit about now.
Mm-hmm. Good stuff. Speaking of shifting, somebody that has never scratched her butt, damn it, Dr. Susan V. Gruner is here. How you doing, Sue? Thank you for your etiquette. What'd you think of this episode?
I completely forgot about this episode, and I really liked it. I agree with what everybody has said. The first thing I wrote down was Devil in the Dark. And I love that. I love that it's like the original series here. And that was one of my favorite ones. And I also wrote acting not so stiff, gelling. The cast is you're getting to be literally best friends in some cases. And it's evident starting in this episode. And I liked it. As I said, I think it's very sci-fi. It was very well done. And I give it an 8.7. None of this 6 stuff.
Yeah.
No, it's getting to be the cast that we all fell in love with. And I really like that.
Yeah.
Speaking of falling in love, everybody, Mai is live in Tokyo. How are you today, Mai? And what'd you think of this episode, by the way?
I thought it was good. I'm going to go way off target on some of my comments, though. This is the background that I put up today for my thing is where I work in Tokyo, and that's right in the middle of Tokyo. It's a place called Roppongi Hills, and it's famous for being one of the biggest office blocks in the city. But it's also got this much greenery. We pay attention to that, and I think terraforming strikes me as some arrogant, seriously arrogant stuff. We haven't maintained our own planet, so we're going to go out and make a new one somewhere else. We're going to make a new Earth. You're going to form a new Terra. I thought, no, that's not. You need to respect what you have. And as a developer, that's what I do for a living is development. You have to have respect for what you're developing. You look at the Star Trek images of San Francisco, where the fleet headquarters are and all that, all concrete and glass. It's a lot of that stuff is all built above ground. And one of the things that we do is we build below ground. So it's called vertical integration. So you leave a lot of green area around it. And I think that that's incredibly important because humans are animals. We need nature. We need to be in touch with nature. And as a developer, you have a fiduciary responsibility to put that nature back. So greenification is a big aspect of what we do. And you recreate not what you think needs to be there because a park that's pretty, you recreate what was there before. So we put in you put in water, we put in plants, you bring the insects back, you bring the birds back, you make it so that humans are interacting with nature a little bit right there in the center of the city. And we've got a required greenery ratio of at least 20% when you build a new project in Tokyo. 20% of the land has to be green. You can't have it be less than that. And we've got about 40% on most of our projects. And I think that that's really important. So for me, this whole thing about terraforming was what I got from, what is life? That is what constitutes life. That's absolutely a huge message. I agree with all of that. In addition to that, I thought that terraforming as a concept, the exact opposite of preservation. It disrespects our home. It disrespects Earth. And that was something that really struck me about this, doing what I do for a living.
Excellent. Now, speaking of reunification, that is Chris McGee's favorite 2-part episode of The Next Generation. Maybe, I don't know. What'd you think of this episode, Chris?
Pretty darn close, actually. I enjoyed this episode much more than I remember when I first saw it back in the day. It was I kind of feel like after having rewatched it that maybe I'm going too far with this, but it seems like it almost encapsulates the very essence of the Next Generation, maybe even Star Trek in general. Going to visit a planet, discover there's something wrong, and now you have a mystery and you have to figure out what it is, and it's always some sort of resolution that makes everyone better for it. And that's kind of like what I watch Star Trek for in the first place, is them discovering the solution to a mystery that usually betters everyone involved. Granted, DS9 explored some of the darker sides, and those were great as well. But TNG especially was just very much towards that direction. I thought that, as everyone has already mentioned, I'm so glad everyone has recognized the resemblance to the original series episode Devil in the Dark, where they found a life form that was not carbon based but silicon based. And this one I don't think it was silicon, but it's definitely not organic. It was great to see Walter Gotell in this episode, aka General Gogol from like 8 Bond movies out there. Oh, he played Director Mandel here. And then, of course, I have to give out my phrase of the episode, which I think everyone knows it by now: ugly bags of mostly water. Oh, and let me move the microphone out of the way for a moment.
Nice.
Yay!
That is a Melissa Longo creation, along with what Melissa and Allison are wearing. You could get that at the introvertedrepublic.com. Click on the walking art made by Melissa tab and get yourself a goodie. You've earned it. It's cool that you mentioned Gogol, because everybody knows our favorite Russian gypsy punk band, Gogol Bordello. Check them out. They're really cool. Gogol Bordello. Carrie Schwentz I will not look that up. There's no chance. But she did strongly agree with a lot of you when you mentioned The Devil in the Dark. I saw you agreeing heartily. How are you, and what do you think of this episode?
Good. Yeah, The Devil in the Dark thing, they did a sort of on the main stage recreation of that episode on the last, on this most recent cruise. And they did it one other time before with, I think, Gates McFadden and Ethan Peck a couple cruises ago. Both times are absolutely hysterical. But yeah, I enjoy this one. The ugly bags of mostly water, like the multiples of the same behind me from a little incident my husband had on the cruise. He bumped his head on the water slide, and they gave him a bag of ice. And it was he got back down to the hot tub, and after a little while it was melting, and he holds it up and says, "Oh, look, it's a bag of mostly water." So we took a picture of it, and as soon as this episode came up, I'm like, "Yep, I know what my background is. Got to do it." And yeah, there's a great scene. I thought sort of an interesting flip on the send the pretty girl in to try to get information from somebody. So this time they sent the pretty boy in to try to get information from Louisa. It could have been written a little bit better, but it was a nice, interesting sort of gender flip on that kind of situation. One of my favorite scenes, though, and we've all done it, the talking back to the computer. Worf is sitting there asking Data and Geordi, and the computer responds, and he turns and says, "I wasn't talking to you." Yeah, we've all been there.
Anyone?
I would have liked a little bit more with the little sparkly light forms. Just the way they talked was fantastic. And I'll close up my time with my limerick that was dictated to me by one of them. They whispered in my ear, "Ugly bags of mostly water. So many of us you have slaughtered. Come back in 3 centuries, but for now let us be. Perhaps then the trust will not falter." They were funny. I would have liked more from them. I would have liked to have gotten to them a little bit sooner. But I enjoy this one. It's fun.
Yeah. Good stuff, Carrie. Thank you very much. Faith Howell, she's got the con on the D. And
always making sure we stay where we're supposed to.
Keeping us on track. What'd you think of this episode?
I think this is one of my favorite first season episodes. Definitely, Ugly Bags of Mostly Water has been quoted probably way too many times in our house as a kid and through my adolescence. It comes up in weird situations. Sorry, my son just woke up from his nap. He's not happy. But I think probably my favorite scene of the whole episode is where they're sort of interrogating the terraformers, and that moment where they're like, well, didn't you notice anything weird? And they're like, yeah, well, we saw some geometric shapes that don't occur in nature, but we didn't really think anything at the time. And I feel like that it doesn't make sense, but it makes total sense. Like when they've been told that there's no life on this planet, obviously a human is going to justify what they're seeing. But I also think it's interesting that isn't that one of our main ways when we send stuff out into the universe? Geometric shapes, prime numbers, the mathematics that are innate to the universe is how we show that we're intelligent. And that's exactly the same way that this entity was trying to communicate, and we missed it. So I thought that was very interesting and just fun to think about how we communicate. And I wonder, all the things that we're sending out, will they one day be either misunderstood or overlooked as just gibberish?
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
funny.
How will
Oh,
aliens
my God.
receive Mozart? That's an interesting question.
Yep. Good thinking there.
Just some organic music, man.
Great organic music. Any final thoughts, Cirroc and Denise?
Yeah.
This one, it leaves me. I mean, again, the central theme of what is life and is beautiful. A great Star Trek central question. But it's like, it's confusing, like how it's set up with this director Mandel being so reluctant to have them come on the planet. It's like what is he covering? What is he hiding? He's anxious. Troy's picking this up, and then he claims to not have known that this life exists. So why is he so reticent? And it never really satisfies me in this storytelling with him. The other thing is, it's like the science officers of the Federation, the top minds that the Federation have to verify the planet, whether there's life or not, really messed up on this one. They really they missed entirely, and there's no kind of acknowledgement of that in the show. There's no outcome for
no repercussions. It seems.
No repercussions. No addressing that in any way. I mean, they had one job to do, and they didn't do it, and they almost totally, wrecked this entire place and life form. And wonder if they still have a job.
Court martial.
Yeah.
I'm just going to bring up a couple of quick points. One that I'm going to circle back on is the whole identifying this life form as intelligent based on the fact that it was able to communicate. I think they repeated that theme a couple of times in this episode, where Picard was explaining to Dr. Mandel that, how do you know it's intelligent? Well, because it tried to communicate. So we use that as essentially a quotient of intelligence is communication, ability to communicate, and how we communicate. And that's essentially determines our intelligence level. And I just think about that also amongst each other and how we can all, as human beings, communicate with each other better to show our own intelligence. And I think there's a big disconnect sometimes between cutting people off because they have varying views or differences. And I think if we can communicate better, all of us grow and benefit from it. The other thing I would say is I thought of a cool idea that perhaps this life form that they encountered, and this is just me spinning it off into my own way, could one day materialize and become something like what we know as the Great Link, where Odo and his ancestry comes from. What was the origin of that Great Link? And these kinds of entities or life form, the way they were replicating and the way that they needed each other, as well as the saline kind of water flow that they were attached to, I think of as a similar kind of thing conceptually as the Great Link and the Changelings kind of evolved from. So that would be a cool thing to have witnessed the beginning of an entire new species that would eventually be, something we encounter in a different form. But that's just speculation. But other than that, I felt like it was a very science-based episode, which makes it good for science fiction. And if you're sitting there and you're encouraging people to think about science and you're thinking them to understand these concepts about elements, about carbon, about light form, I think that's, inspiring that curiosity is what science fiction is supposed to do. And I think they accomplished that.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
You're here.
Now we're all very, very smart. You guys, we had Dr. Mohamed Noor joining us for the first segment as well. So it's quite a fun day for us with a lot of learning and a lot of science. It's been really, really cool. But everybody at home, that's it. That's all we've got for you today. So we'd like to give a very special thanks, of course, to Melissa Longo, Mai, Sue, Jason, Allison, Carrie, Faith, and Ugly Bag of Mostly Wine McGee. So for myself, for Denise Crosby, for Aaron Eisenberg, and for that microbrain, whatever that thing was. Thank you all very much for joining us. And until next time, always remember the seventh rule.